to think about your thinking. And it's really about your ability to then control and manage your thinking processes. And you do that then by organizing, monitoring, and adapting. So once you start thinking about what those thoughts are, you can then pick it apart even more. And what it does is it also gives you an ability to reflect upon your tasks and the process that you undertake so that you can really understand what that thought process was for each of those tasks that it took you to get to that situation. So let's take one of the statements mentioned here and let's break it down into what cultural intelligence practitioners would say. So let's use the case study of this statement, which is actually a very true case study and a statement that was made by one of my clients. And let's just call her Kim. And Kim is a volunteer manager who's been trying to engage different immigrant populations in her tutoring and mentoring program. And she currently has some immigrant volunteers from immigrant communities, but what she would like to do is to increase that because she's found that it's been very useful. So in cultural intelligence work, we would break this thought pattern down in the following ways. First, you see the words or the expression thinking is what Kim would say is when we hire a cultural liaison, that's going to help us build better relationships with the community. Okay, so if she took that statement, those words down, and she broke it down into what were actually her thoughts behind expressing that statement, she would realize that when she was thinking we need to hire a cultural liaison because we really need a cultural liaison. It's been a while and we've been needing someone for a long time. Another thought pattern that she identified was that in hiring a cultural liaison, that would help to build, that would help to develop these relationships because the relationships were important. So when you break the thoughts down, you realize that the thoughts are actually about beliefs that you might have about yourself or the situation. And sometimes, these are conscious or unconscious. And what are really beliefs? They're just simply habitual mind patterns, which is why it's conscious and unconscious because they're habitual, in which you come to believe or you come to place trust or confidence within someone or something. So in this situation, to find out the thought patterns and the beliefs or the assumptions, you'd have to break down the words and what are actually the thoughts that support the words and what are really then the belief systems that support those thoughts. And as Kim did this, Kim realized that there were a lot of assumptions associated with her beliefs. And I'm giving you two of the assumptions that she identified here. The first assumption is that in that statement, without realizing it, there was an assumption that this cultural liaison that she would hire would solve their problems. And the problem was not being able to build relationships with the community. Okay. The second piece that she identified was that the cultural liaison would be able to develop these relationships. And that's a huge assumption that she made because it was an assumption that what she said to me was basically we would be putting a lot of pressure on this one person. Like this person's going to develop all the relationships with the different communities just because they're this cultural liaison. And she also said to me it's actually really not a good beginning to develop a relationship with a new employee, but also not a good way to develop relationships with people in general. So this assumption that this person would do all this cultural awareness for us or for her wasn't really expressed, but it's there. So what did this do for Kim as she looked through, okay, what are the words that I'm speaking and what are the thoughts behind it and then what are the beliefs and the assumptions that are underlining this? She began to ask herself questions that were completely different from what she's asked herself before. And so I'm going to give you some of those questions that we worked through in a coaching session. One of the questions that she asked about that statement and doing this helped her to come to was, what am I really trying to achieve here? And she asked that question because she thought she knew, but as she looked at the assumptions underneath that statement that she made, it made her think, oh, really? Well, what if it's not good to put pressure on this cultural liaison to do all of this and have all this expectation, what is it really that I'm trying to achieve here? The second question she asked was, what kind of relationships with the community do I really want to build? The third one was, will bringing in staff really help this situation, or will it hurt the situation? So here's a question about, okay, we've said for a long time that we need a cultural liaison, but is this going to really help us, or is this something that's going to hurt us in the situation? So here she's being very intentional about her questions and her line of strategic thinking about that situation. And then the fourth question she asked was, what is really creating this barrier between our organization and the community? Is it really because we don't have a cultural liaison, or is it because of a completely different reason that we're not even thinking about? And I think that question, and actually all those four questions are really great, but because the question and the consultation I had with her was about finding this cultural liaison, the fourth question about what is really creating this barrier, and is it really because we don't have a cultural liaison, really was a trigger moment for her. And it really was a great mind-shifting question for her, because as she did this work, she started to acquire more knowledge and realized that there was some information that she was lacking in order for her to do more intentional work around building relationships with diverse communities. Now, I'd like to move to another piece of cultural intelligence, which is the contemplation piece. And this is, the principle of contemplation and mindfulness. And there's actually a lot to focus on here, but because of our time with this webinar session, I'm going to just pick out the most practical piece to focus on, which is around self-efficacy. So self-efficacy basically is a representation of your perception of your own ability to meet a goal that you set for yourself. And in the case of intercultural and cross-cultural situations, self-efficacy is then your ability to be confident in your own intercultural adaptability. And as someone working with different, new, and unfamiliar cultures, your self-efficacy would determine how you think about the situation, how you feel, and often how you behave in those cultural situations. So again, it's your beliefs about what you can and cannot do, and it's also your self-confidence level in intercultural situations and the results that it might have on your ability to be adaptable to another culture. Okay, so this is important because, again, it goes back to your beliefs and assumptions. And remember that the assumptions of your mind, that it really does stir up your internal motivation for you to be successful, to fully engage in the problem. So in this diagram that I have here, I just have a list of from the research around self-efficacy and intercultural work and cultural intelligence work, when people have high self-efficacy, how they tend to perceive a situation around differences, and what people perceive when they have low self-efficacy, what new and unfamiliar cultural settings will look like to them. So this is on, I would say, a continuum. So you could put high self-efficacy on one end, and then you could put low self-efficacy on the opposite end. And in between, there's, people can kind of fluctuate in between. But for high self-efficacy perspectives, people who are culturally intelligent, the research shows that individuals will look at information and the situation as, this is a situation or this is a task that is unfamiliar to me, but I can master it. So in the case of Kim, who was looking for a cultural liaison for her tutoring and mentoring program, and she realized, there's a roadblock here. I'm not really being intentional about the relationships that I want to build. That roadblock for her became something of, how could I turn this roadblock into something that I can master, that I can solve through. So what it does is that it sets higher commitment to goals and processes, and there's this internal motivation to do the work more diligently. Most people who are at least in the research, will focus on, I'll just keep trying again. I'll keep trying again. Even if I fail or I make a mistake, I'm going to learn from it and I will try it again. And this is very different from people who have lower self-efficacy around their own ability and confidence and adaptability to unfamiliar new cultural settings. Individuals who do that tend to think the task is too big. And what often happens is there's no commitment to the goals in the process. People's motivations get decreased, and there's little effort to wanting to to resolve the situation or to think differently about the situation. And I've definitely seen this within my client work as well as in training workshops that I've done around cultural intelligence, is to hear people who have a lower self-efficacy or confidence level in their ability to adapt to different cultures, for them to say, you know, this is so stressful, or this is just too complicated. It goes down in the priority list in terms of goals in the work plan. So it becomes more of an obstacle and a challenge for people. Okay. So if I was to use the example of Kim again, who again is recruiting tutors and mentors for her program, you know, when we walked through this, Kim said that she actually rated herself towards the higher end of self-efficacy. She wouldn't say that she had like very high self-efficacy, but she would say that she was closer to that end than the lower end. And she would say, and she said to me that although it seems stressful to keep trying to find the perfect cultural liaison to develop those perfect relationships that she was looking for, and then having to revisit the situation when she thought, you know, it was all said and done because they got a budget for it, they had the position posted, and then to revisit this conversation that I was having with her was a little stressful for her. But she was willing to see the possibilities for what that new thinking could bring her. So even though I've been thinking and talking about this at an individual level about self-efficacy, you can certainly apply self-efficacy towards an organization, team, or even your program level. So think about where you yourself fall on this continuum of self-efficacy, and then also think about where your organization falls on this level of self-efficacy. And that's important because you might have very high self-efficacy in doing this work, but your organization has a lower self-efficacy in being adaptable and doing this work around new and unfamiliar cultural settings and environments. And that could be a tension point for you as you're doing your work. And if you can identify that, what it helps you to do is be more strategic about maybe how you can approach your organization to do your work differently, or find strategies for yourself so that you can manage that process better. So the next piece and the last piece is this component of CI, which is the adaptive behavior, which is the do piece. So CI requires that you engage in this adaptive behavior, and it necessitates that you really understand and that you have this motivation to achieve doing this adaptive behavior. So not only do you have to do the head piece, which is the thinking piece, and then the heart piece, which is really thinking about your emotions and your feelings about your own confidence level, you must also do something about it. So to be culturally intelligent, it is not enough for you to just know that information and how you think about it, or just be motivated. You have to find the appropriate behavioral responses. And you also must be willing to try to learn new behaviors and then to know when and how to use them. So the question becomes, well, then how do you get to these new behaviors if you know that that's, if you've thought about, your thought process and you've contemplated about it, how do you actually get to these new behaviors? Well, I'm going to give you 3 questions that I've used as tools for myself and also tools for my clients and in training sessions that I've done that I think can really help you immediately to help you think about your situation differently. I use these questions a lot, especially when I'm stuck or when I don't know what to do or if I'm thinking too much about my thinking. So these 3 questions are, what am I seeing? What am I not able to see? And what could this be other than what I've seen? So that 3rd question is really about the possibilities of the situation. So I'm going to use the example with Kim and how she was trying to find a cultural liaison and how I walked her through this. So you can see this for yourself, but also be able to think about this for your own program or your own organization. So here's what Kim saw about recruiting volunteers to her program. When she asked herself these 3 questions, she came up with what she would consider a individual work plan for herself about her program and recruiting volunteers within her program. So basically, she recognized that her volunteer program needed more resources and support, including time from her managers to invest in building these relationships because they weren't building these relationships. And she realized that there were certain things that were just not going to change with her organization, because of their beliefs and some of the restrictions they had about time and funding and program priorities.